Cool. We've got 4 minutes here. I guess we'll start at 12 for your thing, but it is live right now. We finally got the stream working. Um, yeah, if anyone wants to go leave comments about how terrible Hopin is, I don't think they have. I don't think they're listening to the text or pulling some NLP thing out of here. But feel free to complain about Hopin in the chats. A lot of people have been sharing some good stories here about biggest dragons that they've slayed. Alexis says, requirements drift. Customer, I pull data into this spreadsheet and make reports from that. Here are the rules and calculations. Me, here are the results. Customer, that's off from what I have. And then they rattle off a bunch of complex and sometimes subjective requirements. Alexis, that's a life story for a lot of us. But and I'm hoping that you did all of this in a BI tool with a database or something on the back end. And then what happened is they put it in Excel after all of that. Mansi says, every so often there's a field we shouldn't be using because it's very unreliable. Why is it unreliable? Nobody knows. That's data observability. And I'm going to post this later. Tomorrow from London, from Europe, we have Andy Petrella debating Kevin Hugh. Kevin runs Metaplane, very smart guy. Known him for a little while. Andy is writing the book on data observability, and they both have different opinions on it. Kevin's, I believe he's going to Big Data London. I believe he's in Europe for that, which is going on in the next couple of days. If anyone's over in London, over in the UK, and so he'll be joining us from there. And he said it should be, it'll be about 10 p.m. there for them. So I think they're both going to have beers. And tomorrow afternoon, afternoon US, evening there, we'll have a debate. Depending on how many beers everybody's had, we'll see how spirited it gets. But cool. Let's kick it off in just a minute here. Sarah, I'm going to go ahead and tee you up. Share.
Sounds great.
Boom. Cool. So we've got your PowerPoint up here, Sarah. I've known you for a little while. You're, one of the sharper people in the space. Very curious, skeptical. Gets things done. That's why you're speaking here. When you told me that you wanted to share the analytics requirements doc, I said, this is perfect. Not only is this something that younger people would really like to, I think a lot of younger people struggle with this, maybe in their first jobs. I know I did when I was a junior analyst 9-10 years ago. It's something that even older people struggle with. And I think, using the product requirements document mindset is something that's super cool. So I'll let you take it away. If we freeze again, we'll figure something out. But yeah, I'll let you take it away. And yeah, glad to have you here.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren. Well, I'm glad to be here. And, I'll kind of start with one of the reasons that I even wanted to present on this. It's really that there's kind of so much back and forth between analytics teams and kind of the rest of the business of what is even required, what are we building, how do you approach it? And I do think that product teams have really nailed this with so much, mature product teams with so much process. And I really think that there's a lot that analytics teams can learn from that and how different teams interact. And I would say that, Lauren, to your point, I would say starting in analytics, some of the, younger, like straight out of college folks, a lot of the things that aren't taught in school, you learn math, you learn stats, you learn R, you learn Python, maybe you even learn BI now. But a lot of the things that aren't taught are like, how do you do business? How do you actually get things done? Which is, the spirit of this whole conference, but how do you actually interact with other teams, make sure everyone's on the same page, and really more of the I would say like softer side, but equally important side. So um, that's what I'll be talking about today. And I plan to use only about 30 minutes for the actual presentation. And if we don't get cut off, happy to kind of answer any other questions or kind of see what discussion comes from that. But Lauren gave me a very kind intro, but I am a consultant. I work with companies on building out data pipelines as well as kind of broader analytics stacks on the marketing side as well. Previously, I led the data engineering team at Perpay, which is a fintech startup. I am also working on my own startup, Versionable, really focused on SaaS observability and really understanding what data in SaaS tools specifically is missing or incorrect. I would say in parallel to data observability, but just for a little bit of a different audience. Today, what I'll really be talking about is the role of contracts between business units. Contracts, very prevalent, obviously, in when you have a legal mindset, but what does that mean when it comes to, within a business, interactions between teams? Second, looking at really like what goes into a product launch, what kind of product launches exist, and what is the role of analytics in those launches. If they're involved, what happens if they're not involved? What can go wrong? And lastly, as per the title of the presentation, talking about the analytics requirements document. I've put together a sample document, which I'll be walking through. I've included the link in the presentation as well, so anyone can access it. But really, how do you ensure proper tracking that you can really measure a product launch and really what that entails? So to kick things off, let's talk about, ribbon cutting. When you launch something, we can talk about ribbons being cut in real estate, right? There's like a new building of, a new real estate mogul or someone launching something. They're also virtual ribbon cuttings, right? Launch a new feature, launch a new marketing campaign. This means different things to different teams, but the key here is that leading up to any sort of launch, there are agreements between a lot of different parties. Usually, a launch is never about just one person or one team. You have agreements between different people. So, what does this look like in different contexts? Let's use real estate as an example. It's very familiar to most of us in our personal lives, but right when you enter, when there's a new building, you're like, wow, I really want to live here. I want to lease an apartment here. You have a lease. That's a contract. It is enforced by law. There are very clear repercussions for breaking your lease or not paying your rent. It's very cut and dry. There's a court system of how you support it. It's very well understood. Now, going into the business world, we have a business product, right, that we release. And here, there's the product requirements document. So this type of contract, I would say, isn't quite as strict as law, but in more mature organizations, I would say even in earlier organizations, the PRD is a fairly well-established concept, and it really tends to kind of gain alignment and align expectations across different teams. It's less formal, but it's still well established. Something that Chad Sanderson actually published a blog on, and I tend to agree with him, is really about data contracts. And what I mean by data contracts is about the analytics team ingesting data from and usually databases that the engineering team supports, and how can we encode those contracts and expectations, right? So when a Postgres table is dropped, there aren't there is no misunderstanding about how it's used. Can it even actually be dropped? But really formalizing that in an encoded way. I would say this is I don't think this idea is very new, but it still does not have most organizations don't function this way. These problems still happen, and I would say it's very conversational, verbal. Maybe it's someone sending a Slack message. Does anyone rely on this table? I'm going to drop it in 24 hours if no one responds. Right? Very informal. So going through kind of and recapping the examples that I walk through, they decrease informality. The commonality between all of these things is that they involve multiple people. When an analytics team, right, like if you're just changing the name of a column that doesn't actually depend on, isn't put into a BI tool and only has dependencies within the analytics team, you have way fewer stakeholders. They all sit in the same team. Sure, it might be between the analyst and data engineer, but they're all within a team. The complexity and friction comes when there has to be agreement across teams, and especially when there's agreement across multiple teams. When I think about measuring a launch, when there's something new, that usually involves multiple teams, right? It involves engineering a lot of the time to build, product to project manage and organize, marketing to actually market the new product and let people know about it, sales to sell the product, get customers using it, right? Especially if it's involves some sort of new pricing tier or something like that. But all of these things have to be measured. Right now it's really about in most organizations that kind of I've seen and worked with both in a full-time and consulting capacity, it's analytics is kind of just along for the ride, and then they come in when the question is really, oh, well, how's the product doing? But that's a little bit too late. When we measure product launches, and we'll walk through this example. This is the kind of the example that I'll focus on for most of the presentation. Consider an e-commerce company. I've used Zappos here as an example. I use Zappos maybe a little bit too much, but let's say there's a newer e-commerce company and they don't have a rewards program, so they're launching a rewards program. Uh, Rewards programs, like whenever you launch a new product, they don't just launch a rewards program and give people free money without an expected benefit to the business. And the question then becomes, what is the benefit to the business? And how do we measure that? How do we measure what the impact is of taking engineering time, product time, resources to build this new feature? Some of the questions that I might ask would be, does the company remain profitable even after the launch of the rewards program? Is revenue increased? Are rewards used or expired? How are they used? On Also on a broad level, does the use of rewards, the people who use rewards, does it impact the lifetime value of those customers? Do they become more loyal customers and thus increase their value to the company? And lastly, is marketing rewards an incentive for new customers, right? There's the returning customers, there's also new customers. Are customers more drawn to, e-commerce company X if there's a rewards program? What does that incentive mean to people? There are different ways to track this and different pieces of information that we would need. First, of course, we need internal data models, right? So this is storing the rewards data in the back end of the application. Usually that's like a Postgres or MySQL database, right? Transactional, something like that, and really captures the root of what rewards are, the amount, the expiration date, then maybe items purchased, whether rewards were used, and having all those relationships mapped out. There's an additional component of product analytics, which is something that I would definitely turn to Timo in his previous talk to talk about, and really event structure and event analytics. So these are tools like Segment, Amplitude. There are many more out there as well, but in the context of launching a rewards program, it would really be, is there confusion in applying rewards? Do people get to a place where they can apply rewards and then drop from the funnel and don't do it? Maybe there's something wrong in the design or product flow, and that's really your typical funnel analysis. Whenever you look at any new product, are people understanding how it works and interacting with the UI, the UX of the product in this new way as expected? Lastly, when it comes to marketing, you talk about attribution. So let's say there's a new um, paid Facebook ad, or there's a new marketing campaign. How are you going to attribute rewards used and customers that you either gain or returning customers, orders that you gain from that communication? How do you attribute that? I would say there's, a lot more different types of applications, right? In customer success, how many questions are being answered about rewards? How much confusion is there, right? But I won't be focusing on that right now. One thing that definitely does not work here is the launch and pray model. So that's what I'm advocating against. Here, I have a picture of baby Moses, and whoever is not familiar with the Passover story, basically I'll do like a 10-second summary of the beginning, which is that the Israelites were enslaved by the Egyptians, and the Israelites had to sacrifice their firstborn. Moses' mother really didn't want to do that, so to try to avoid that, she put him in a basket in the river, floated him down the river. And who found him? Actually, the Pharaoh's daughter. That was extremely lucky. She did not have any other choice, and that's why she did what she did. In business, we do have another choice. The launch and pray model, what that will result in is very likely lost time and unusable data post launch, right? So you launch something and then you try to loop in analytics after the fact, try to measure it, but then analytics doesn't have the data that they need and you need to implement another field. And so that, let's say those conversations last, maybe someone's out of office on vacation, right? September is a great time to travel. And they're just not there. So that takes 2 to 3 weeks to even figure that out. And that's 2 to 3 weeks that potentially this new product that launched, you also have no idea if it's potentially poor for business performance. And to even measure that, you have to wait 2 to 3 weeks. That's the lost time, plus an additional maybe 2 weeks for the implementation of the new tracking data, and then another 2 weeks to actually get information and really answer that question. That's a total of 4 to 5 weeks. Where if this has a negative influence on your business and business model and the metrics that are important, you just will have no idea. And that's not to even talk about, I haven't even mentioned yet, the second bullet here, which is extra effort to meet tracking requirements, right? Maybe there was a decision that was made by the engineering team, product team without looping in analytics that then has to be redone. And all that time could have just been saved if it was just done differently from the beginning. And so it costs potentially the business money, teams time, and you just don't, you sacrifice being able to make decisions quickly. This is really where the analytics requirements document comes in. So relating this to the product requirements document, the goals are very, very similar. In product, you're defining a product launch, scope, and goals, versus in analytics requirements document, you're defining the analytics and the data required to measure those product goals. You, of course, want to make sure there's alignment between those goals, which we'll talk about in a minute, but it's really focused on measuring those goals, the data required, and just the expectations of what you are supposed to and don't need to measure. The stakeholders in both cases are really the rest of the business. You're going from engineering to product to product and analytics and the rest of the business. An additional stakeholder, of course, in the ARD is the product team itself. Product is usually the team that is determining those goals, making the decisions of whether a product launch is successful or not, defining what success is. So they're going to be a very big stakeholder. But given that you're usually a launch involves so many other teams, the marketing team might have other things that they want to measure from a marketing perspective. And you need to make sure as an analytics team to take those things into account. As far as structure, also very similar. We'll kind of walk through the structure of the ARD section by section with examples, but really what I'll call out is two things. The first is when it comes to design, product usually loops in product design. In some organizations, it's a separate org. In some organizations, it's part of product. I would say most commonly part of product. But that design really sits internally. I would say that data design, the analytics team has to work very closely with engineering because they are not the people actually implementing the data. They're only consuming it. This is, of course, one of the biggest challenges of working in analytics as a field, that you are consumers of the data, you own the transformations, how it's used, but have a lot less say of how the data is structured. And this is what I think needs to change most in organizations. The second thing that I'll call out is stakeholder sign off. This is usually not a formal part of a PRD. I think it should be a formal part of both a PRD and an ARD. And is really important and something that I'm going to build up to a little bit, but just really want to call that out, that think it should be really part of both, but isn't necessarily part of a PRD. So to kick things off, let's talk about goals. So broadly, what the goals are is just like a PRD. This should confirm both the goals of the product launch itself, because we want to make sure that there's alignment between product and analytics, right? That's where that stakeholder comes in, but also the goals of which metrics are important. This isn't really the how, this is more the what. So for example, right, launching a rewards program, that's kind of the example that I'll be talking through. Customer lifetime value. This is a metric that might be common, but is especially important to track here. We also want to track other metrics like revenue of users enrolled versus not enrolled in rewards, which means we have to be able to segment which users are and are not enrolled, right, in a very specific way. Profitability and product margin. That's usually from the commerce perspective. Commerce and finance work in tandem to figure out what the product margins are. How do we price, right? How do you price products? Where do you source products? And all of the kind of complexity that comes with having an e-commerce business. And lastly, this is really the regularity of usage, but it's really about how sticky your customers are. There are a variety of ways to measure this, but the commonality between all of these different metrics are we're adding in rewards as a filter and really looking at, for example, customers or orders of customers that are using rewards and are not using rewards, orders that have rewards and weren't redeemed with rewards. What are we expecting the differences there? We also want to go into these goals having some sort of hypothesis. You have some sort of null hypothesis and you're trying to prove it or disprove it, right? I think here, this is really where product comes in terms of this is answering the question of, why is this product even worth building? If we have no idea, then why are we spending all this time? That should probably be something to figure out. That's really the work that product has done in advance to have a hypothesis that customer lifetime value will increase. The revenue of users enrolled in rewards is actually expected to be higher. And that's why it's worth it. It's not like, the company is just giving away free money. So that's really covering kind of the goals and more focused on measurement, but very much in line with the product launch goals at large. Moving on to the data criteria, right? Okay, so you have goals, you have what you need to measure. This is really the question of how are you going to measure those things? What information do you need to be able to measure those things? And one thing that is really important here is measuring a certain metric currently and just what it is today versus historically and at point in time. A lot of engineering systems are not really thinking about what was something at a point in time because it doesn't matter. If someone logs it, right, if you think about it from a customer's perspective, if someone logs into a tool, they only care about how many rewards points they have today. That's really mostly what they care about and how far away they are from some sort of threshold of something that they want to buy. From an analytics perspective, having that information over time is extremely important. For each data point, we want to be able to tie it to specific rewards. I'm talking, right, foreign keys, one-to-one relationships. We don't want to calculate in aggregate because then we are making assumptions about how different things aggregate. We want to tie, for example, a specific rewards points to dollars ratio at point in time, right? So on Zappos, it was 1 point is 1 cent. Just in case that changes, right? That may or may not be in scope. But just in case that changes, we want to make sure to tie that at point in time. So if it does change, we can track that and really understand. Or even rewards redeemed correctly? Is the system working properly? A lot of the time that QA also falls on analytics. As far as the rewards data goes, how many rewards were granted, when they expire, when they're used, and having all of those timestamps because we want to track this behavior over time as well. Does it, right, in e-commerce, you have Q4 and you have the holidays. How does that how does behavior during Q4 change from the behavior in the rest of the year? Maybe it's actually very different and you need to look at that information differently. Items in each order bought with rewards, right? You want to be able to tie all of these things again with foreign keys one-to-one. Track all of the events as well. So those are really some of the things that come to mind. I'm sure that there are many more, and there's a lot of complexity in rewards in launching a rewards program. But just to give kind of an idea of really what first comes to mind, an example of kind of what the criteria should look like. Now jumping to assumptions. So something that so for in the data criteria, one thing that I mentioned was tying specific items from an order to whether they were bought with dollars or rewards. It is then assumed that we actually have the information on items bought per order, and we have all the information on those products, their amounts, so on and so forth. I would say that's an expectation and a baseline for e-commerce businesses, but there are other things that are a lot more vague, and I think should be assumed and written down to make sure that everyone is under the same assumption. For example, event tracking is a really great one. Event tracking in the funnel of the checkout flow. A lot of the time, teams will rely on page views to track the flow. However, a lot of the time, the checkout flow, if the URL does not change, then you may not have all of those different page views. They're not going to register as different page views in tools like Segment or Amplitude. Maybe you have certain button clicks that at certain points you redeem rewards or don't redeem rewards. You want to be able to segment that appropriately, and you need to be able to track all of the different behavior depending on how mature the organization is with product analytics and event tracking. This may or may not exist in smaller organizations. The analytics team including this in the assumptions might be superfluous. In larger organizations, you may not have insight into what exists, so I would say include as much as you think is necessary in the assumptions. Now talking about how will this data actually look, right? So in the data criteria, we talked about what information we need, but we really didn't talk and how we're going to measure it. But what we really didn't talk about is how is the information going to be stored at a very granular level. What primary key, what foreign key is going to exist, right? How is that going to be structured? I do not believe that that's actually on the analytics team because again, what we covered was data does not generate from the analytics team. It generates from the engineering team. So they should really be the ones to architect it in a way that, with efficiency in mind. There are other things that are important for application architecture that the engineering team is just better suited to make those decisions. However, the reason that I included it here is not because it needs to be part of the ARD, but because analytics needs to be involved in those meetings and in those decisions. In more mature engineering organizations, those decisions usually start out with an RFC, which stands for request for comments. So what will happen is one engineer will draft some sort of, will propose an architecture for either data models, data storage, maybe it's application, infrastructure, whatever it may be. And then that'll invite the rest of the engineers to, as the name suggests, provide comments onto, where are the pitfalls, what maybe could be done better, ask questions. And someone from the analytics team should also be there to provide comments. A great example that I see so often is it's very easy for engineers to store fields in a JSON object in a transactional table. That's totally fine if that data isn't being accessed a lot and you just need to make sure to store it somehow so that if you need it, it's there. However, what would be excruciatingly difficult is if there's a foreign key stored in a JSON table. That means You have to unnest that column and then join it on another table. That is extremely inefficient. And there have been a lot of conversations also about cost management that also has an implication for the efficiency of queries, the cost of queries, especially in warehouses that are usage based, like BigQuery or Snowflake. So all of these things have these engineering decisions and data model decisions have impact downstream on the analytics side, which to me just makes it obvious that analytics needs to be involved in these conversations. Now, moving into what is kind of out of scope. Launching the rewards program, for example, could not entail testing the points to dollars ratio. And tracking this test should be part of a completely different product launch and separately tracked. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but the point is that for the analytics team, this is really about getting alignment and making sure that everyone understands what is and is not out of scope. Lastly, the kind of section that I actually think is the absolute most important is stakeholder sign off. It's very easy to nod yes in a Zoom meeting while half listening and also planning right what you're going to do with your child for daycare the next day. But when people have to actually put pen to paper and actually sign and put their name on something in writing, most of the time, what I've seen is that it creates this urge to make sure that what you're reading, that you agree with it, and then you sign off and you truly get opinions and other asks, and making sure that product marketing, commerce, right, any other teams involved in the launch are truly understanding and truly there is alignment. This is really the purpose of the ARD. And what I believe in is that just like product has a seat at the table to any product launch, analytics should have a seat at the table for any product launch, whether it be a business product, a new marketing medium, whether it be texting users in addition to emailing them, whatever it is. But the earlier analytics teams are involved, the less time is wasted, the fewer mistakes are made, and in general will lead to a more measurable product launch. So finally, what I'd like to leave you with, most importantly, every launch should be measured. Launch and pray and not really knowing what happens, you don't really have an understanding of, what does success even mean? Was it worth actually putting the time into developing this new product? Second, analytics teams should be involved early and have a seat at the table. This means involving them as soon as product design starts, not the day before the launch, because then time is already wasted if anything needs to implement. The last thing an analytics team wants to do is delay the launch. If you involve them early, then timelines can still be maintained. Just like product teams have process, analytics teams need process for alignment. I know process is a word that it's like you have a love-hate relationship with it, but I do think that it will lead to better organization, better measurement, and just more synchrony within organizations. I have linked the ARD that I walked through, and you can find my socials below. And now I'll kind of open up to any questions, and thanks for watching. Lauren, I think you are muted.
There we go. Not a streaming issue this time, just a mute button issue. You're hitting on a lot of points that I think resonate a lot with a lot of people. There's a couple questions we'll go over that have come up in the comments here. I would start with one of mine though. Is one of my main things is like, here's the engineering, the people who are producing whatever data's manifested. It appears as, I don't know, a Postgres database table as a simple example. That's one piece. The business is on the other side. The data team, whether that's analytics, BI, it's called different things at different orgs. we all know what we're talking about here. Is this more of pushing things to the product and solving that piece with the ARD, or is it more that plus like getting the business scoped in? Because I agree with a lot of things that you're saying here about like yeah, analytics, like scope it into like a release, feature development, etc. Um, one of my big things is, a lot of people know, is cost, and like if you don't do this right, that's where you accrue costs later. Um, but like how do you get the business involved as well? And like how do you manage like a mandate for this? Because this is a behavior change. I'm asking a long question here, but you know, uh, I think a lot of people know this is a problem, and in changing behavior, how do we do that as data professionals?
Yeah, I would say the easiest place to start is working very closely with the product team. A lot of the time, the product team has already done the work to figure out, what needs to be measured, what's important to people. I think just putting it in a place a second time, if everyone's in agreement, then there's no cost to it and everyone agrees. But the product team has already had relationships with different people in the business and has done a lot of this work before any engineers are looped in at all, and so I really think that that's kind of one of the reasons that almost equate it to the PRD, because it's really in parallel. As soon as product sends out the PRD, right, in parallel you could send out the PRD and an analytics requirements document. As far as kind of looping in the rest of the business, I think that this is a broader problem than just with product launches. And I do think that's why there's some, even like, I hate throwing in different titles, but even new titles, right? There's a data product manager. There's someone who is, right, working with different parts of the business. And I think that there are different ways to interact with that. But in this particular case, in my experience, the easiest place to get started is to work very closely with product.
Yep. Here's a question from Ray. Would a business case fit into the goals section? Like, we've got competing requirements. How do we know if we should be working on a problem?
Yeah, I would say my answer to this is, like, to me, this is more of a product question. So this is more of a question of should we be building the product? I think that this is less about process in terms of figuring out what to measure, and actually, I think more solved by having a data person have a seat at the table on the executive side, right? Because usually a lot of the decisions of what to build aren't, maybe they come from product, but there's usually, before it gets to the rest of the company, it's usually talked about between the C-suite. If someone on the analytics side is on the C-suite and can ask some of those questions, right, of should we be building this? What data do we have to support that this is something worth, investing the time into and testing out? That's where those decisions are made. So I think that's actually a larger, harder, but different behavioral change.
Yeah. That makes sense. Another question. Jenna says, how can you make sure the ARD stays up to date and does not get ignored after the initial creation launch? Yeah, no, totally resonates. And anyone who's worked as a product manager before or in that kind of capacity knows that like the PRD has the same problem potentially. So yeah, how do we make sure it stays up to date?
Yeah, this totally resonates. And I do agree that the PRD kind of has the same problem. I would say that um, post, in my experience, even with a PRD, like post launch, it's less about keeping it up to date because you've already launched. It's more about, ensuring that initially the launch is there, and if anyone has questions about it, you refer to a document and send them a document, as opposed to being in a position where you have a he said she said. With analytics, there's of course a little bit of a different beast, which is data changes over time, and you could have implemented some sort of data model or front end, event system that then with a new release in something that has absolutely nothing to do with the product that you're really trying to measure, there's a regression and that event changes. That to me is more actually on the like data contract side of when I mentioned kind of what Chad was talking about, of making sure that you have an understanding of the data, and that right, you have a contract of between engineering and analytics, and it's not specific to a product launch and a set of expectations. It's more about, well, we implemented this, now we're relying on it. If it changes, we have to know so that we can change the way that we're calculating metrics.
Yeah, right on. And I think a couple people have asked here, like, do you have the ARD, and can they see the document that you have? I mean, we can put it up next week. Do you have it available to share
I
here?
do. Yeah, so for some reason, the chat was giving me issues, but Lauren, I messaged it in the private chat. So if it's working for you, feel free to
Yeah,
post
let me
that.
see if I can pull this up here. Boom. I will go ahead and share this, and we'll share it out
Awesome.
in the follow-up as well. Um, Boom, here's this. Any other questions here from anybody? I'm looking through the Q&A right now. People are asking, are we frozen again? No, I think that was just my own incompetence with the mic. And I think, yeah, I mean, this definitely resonates with a lot of people. William Plummer says it works. Excellent. Something's working today. We've got a link that works through this platform. It's excellent. I guess, yeah. Any other final? Oh, here's Joe. I'll do one more question here and share this. This is from Joe. Do you find the ARD approach works best at more mature companies, or has it been equally as impactful at younger businesses and startups? PRDs are documentation. We all know that goes stale. And ARDs feel like the same category of resource. So yeah, I mean, what do you think about that? Is this something, where in the maturity curve do you use this? Is it applicable everywhere?
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's applicable everywhere. I think that if you have a company of 10 people, a lot of time you just don't have the time and you're just like building, iterating, and that's, I would say, definitely too early. But I do think, I mean, I've where I tried to use this framework, it was at Perpay, and that was about 50 people. So I do think that that was a kind of a reasonable size where you could still get a lot of important people around a table and around Zoom, or whatever it may be, and talk about it. As far as it going stale, I think that I am really differentiating between a process document that actually isn't supposed to live on forever and is only supposed to live on like say like T plus 30 days past launch, and is really meant to just get people aligned in terms of launch so you can measure it. And after that, things might change, and that's where actually I think metrics should be defined in documentation, and that has obviously its own other set of problems and of it going stale. But I'm really differentiating between those two things in terms of how long it should live.
Cool. And one final thing here. This is from Bayram. Do you have a framework when engineering signs off on the ARD, but then don't implement it according to the ARD? So they have it, they've signed off on it, but then they don't do it correctly. How do you resolve that, and how do you prevent this?
Yeah, that's a really tough one, and definitely one that resonates. I think that's a great question. Uh, I would say initially, one thing that works but is, I would say, like more labor intensive, for lack of a better word, on the analytics team is for analytics to be part of QA. So right, you can QA, when you QA in a staging environment and test a product before it's launched, engineers might, look at, are there any errors thrown? Is it working? Product will likely be looking at, comparing the actual product to Figma and making sure that the designs match and it's what it's expected. However, a lot of the time, no one is actually QAing the analytics. Our data models, as they were designed, our analytics events as they were designed. So I do think there needs to be someone that's like a third type of QA that I think is really important. And one of the things is, without a process like an ARD or an RFC, if those things aren't defined and people aren't under people aren't in alignment in what the expectations are, it becomes very hard to QA. So I will say the first step is defining expectations, and then the next step is, when you enforcing it in the QA process, so that you make sure that when a product launches, that's what in the world that matches the expectations and alignment that you've kind of set out.
Yeah, no, makes total sense. Super cool. Great. Well, this is great. The resource was shared in the chat. Super interesting. I think this should be used at smaller companies more than it probably is. I think the idea of data, me personally, get moving quick is not always correct. Startups have to move quick, but I do think a lot of them are moving too quick. And I think this is a good framework for maybe some of these later stage startups, companies that I've worked with, to take some time, plan something out, and like come to an agreement on on how you're going to track everything, and what kind of data is produced, how it's shaped, what it means, etc. So super cool. Yeah, and you can find Sarah online, or like where can plug yourself, Sarah? Where you're working on versionable. You're a consultant in the space. Where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's just my name. On Twitter, I'm Sarah MK125. I write on Substack. It's just sarahsnewsletter.substack.com. I am building Versionable. I encourage everyone to check it out. It's a little bit more targeted towards marketing and sales professionals, but really bringing the idea of observability to SaaS tools. So I think that there are a lot of parallels that can be drawn with kind of this explosion of data observability tools to kind of other teams. And if you couldn't tell from my presentation, I really like figuring out, how analytics principles, engineering principles, how they can apply, and how those teams can work with business teams, and how business teams can be more effective as well, and be more data driven. So those are kind of the parallels. Do check out Versionable, and feel free to reach out in any of those different ways.
Super cool. We're going to take a quick break here. We've got 15 minutes before, I guess, the next session. I believe that's Phil with Google. We're going to talk about what you can get for free on GCP. We've also got Ian with a discussion about Snowflake, managing Snowflake performance, cost, everything like that. Becoming a major thing people are talking about. So we've got a couple of good, sessions about cloud data platforms coming up, how to optimize them, how to, do things correctly with them. And I'm super excited. But we're going to take a quick break here. I will turn the stream down for a couple of minutes, but we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes here. So take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Thank you, Sarah.
Cool. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, everyone.